Excellency, Mr. Prabowo Subianto, Your Highness, Sheikh Nasser, Excellency, Mr. Ding Shushang, Excellency, Mr. Paul Mashatile, ladies, gentlemen, friends, I welcome all the participants and guests of the 28th St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. Traditionally, it is a platform for substantive, meaningful discussions on the most relevant subjects of this day, and we are glad that these discussions in the forum platforms are attended by representatives of 140 countries and territories. This year, the themes discussed here, and all of them are important, or rather, as colleagues call them, discussion tracks, include the quality of growth in a multipolar world and great challenges. And these challenges include tectonic shifts in global economics and demographics, including the dynamics of the world's population. They also include social, societal, and geopolitical controversies that manifest themselves through crises and regional conflicts that are flaring up anew with greater force. Unfortunately, this is something we are witnessing currently in the Middle East. Finally, these challenges include climate change and acute environmental issues that require a response, as well as a transition to a new technological structure, which is founded upon digital platforms, AI, and autonomous systems that are capable of making decisions without the participation of human beings. The thing is, how do we make sure that these positive technological changes are spread ubiquitously? How do we make sure that these new digital technological solutions are universally acceptable, allowing countries, regions, and cities achieve a new level of development, climbing the ladder of progress, making sure that this technological breakthrough benefits everyone, including in terms of changing societal structure, decreasing level in inequality, as well as higher standards of living? How do we make sure every person has equal opportunities and gets access to knowledge that will help tap into their potential? And how do we implement the fundamental principle of justice? In the course of my address, I would like to dwell on the tasks at hand for Russia. I'll also speak about what we're doing to address these tasks together with the business community, the academia, and civil society. I'll speak about the approaches we propose in order to support economic growth, not just within our country, but also how we create joint mechanisms for global and regional development in partnership with friendly nations. Let me start with an overview of the current state of the Russian economy. Despite a challenging external environment, the Russian GDP over the last 2 years has been growing by more than 4% every year. In other words, that was higher than average across the world. Speaking about the structure of this growth, let me cite a specific criterion indicator, which we have dubbed non-oil and gas GDP. It's calculated so as to factor out the influence of industries related to the extraction of hydrocarbons. So this non-oil and gas GDP in Russia in 2023 grew by 7.2%, whereas in 2024 it grew by almost 5%, namely 4.9%. In other words, we see a higher growth rate than across our GDP on average. In other words, the contribution of the commodity-related component into the economic dynamics of our country is no longer defining. Moreover, at the current point in time, it is showing negative dynamics. And by far, the defense industry is not the only thing sustaining the general growth of GDP, despite what some claim. Yes, indeed, the defense industry has played a role, but we have to look at the structure in detail. Over the last 2 years, we see growth in agriculture, industry in general, construction, logistics, services, finance, as well as IT. In other words, almost all key systemically important industries of the Russian economy have been growing. What does it tell us? It tells us that thanks to the efforts of dozens of thousands of companies and enterprises, their teams, managers, thanks to the initiatives and efforts of millions of entrepreneurs, our economy is not simply growing steadily. Rather, it is also gaining in quality, complexity, as well as diversity. The idea of a Russian economy being completely commodity-based and dependent on the exports of hydrocarbons is evidently outdated. It's becoming a thing of the past. Reality tells us a different picture. Russia ranks 4th in the world in terms of the GDP size, and it's the first economy in Europe. And it's, of course, not GDP per capita. This is just the general GDP size. And it is a very important indicator. But it's not enough to achieve this position. It's important to reaffirm it all the time, reaffirm the status of one of the biggest economies. We need to create a conducive environment to make sure that the businesses, both from Russia and from friendly nations, keeps investing resources, modernizing and expanding its production capacities in Russia. Our current task is to make sure our economy is on a trend of balanced growth. This balanced growth implies moderate inflation as well as low unemployment rate. The statistics tells us that yearly inflation rate has decreased to single digits. Right now it's less than 10%. As of June the 16th, it stood at 9.6%. Certainly, a lot still needs to be done, but we keep on targeting the inflation rate. Of course, this is largely thanks to the active efforts by the government in terms of developing supply-side economics, but also the actions of the central bank. At the same time, the inflationary dynamics is better than anticipated by many experts, even better than the forecast by the Bank of Russia, which is something that has allowed us to proceed to a careful loosening of the monetary policy. But the changes in consumer prices doesn't tell us the full picture. I would like to reiterate, a well-balanced growth implies not just moderate inflation, but low unemployment rate, as well as a positive economic dynamics. And we need to follow all the indicators telling us how our industries, companies and firms are feeling. A couple of words about the labor markets. There's something I'm gonna get back to later, but I would like to say that the first 4 months of this year saw a GDP growth by 1.5% year on year. In April, the growth picked up to 1.9%, and yet some specialists and experts point out the risks of stagnation and even recession, and this is something we have to avoid at all costs. I know that at this forum, you've listened to the discussions that are currently ongoing within the government. There is a discussion between the Central Bank of Russia on the one hand and the government on the other. And, of course, you are well versed in the facts. What we need is to pursue a well-informed, careful, fiscal and monetary policy. We need to make sure that our mechanisms are fine-tuned in order to support and stimulate growth. We need to ensure macroeconomic, inflationary and financial stability. In other words, our strategic task is to be active and steady and consistent in changing the structure of the Russian economy, and we've made great headway in that regard. But it is of paramount importance to keep advancing given the drastic changes across the world. The importance of additional measures to those ends that is something we discussed during the session of the Council on Strategic Development and National Projects back in December last year. The government, regions, the business, expert community and academia have to work together to improve the long-term economic growth and achieve structural changes in the economy. Let me dwell a little bit on these key aspects we need to address today. First and foremost, we need to change the nature of employment and consumption patterns. We have to create an environment which will stimulate economic activity among our citizens, to make sure that our young people and senior citizens can fully tap into their potential in the labor market so that they can get new competencies, build a successful career, and improve their income. In other words, I'm referring to a transition to an economy of high wages based not on a shortage of labor force. When entrepreneurs have to resort to raising wages so as to vie and compete for workers. Rather, these high wages have to be based on the quality of jobs as well as higher labor productivity. Over the last 4 years, employment in Russia grew by 2,400,000 people. Starting from October last year, across the country, we stabilized the unemployment rate at around 2.3%. We managed to achieve a record low of unemployment rate. We are also witnessing positive dynamics in those Russian regions that traditionally have been facing acute problems in employment. I refer, as colleagues know, mostly to the south of Russia. And right now, we see the unemployment over there half or so. This is thanks to well-informed, stimulating macroeconomic policies as well as active efforts by the regional authorities with the support of federal employment programs. It is also important to integrate up-to-date and cutting-edge technological solutions such as platform-based employment and digital marketplaces. Our colleague from Bahrain has told me that he's just been to the Chechen Republic, and with his own eyes he witnessed the republic's development. The Chechen Republic is a good example in that regard. I would also like to point out that youth employment is growing. I mean, those young people who are simply entering into the labor market, trying to secure their first job. In terms of youth unemployment, Russia is one of the world's top performers because we have an unemployment rate among the young people at around 7.5%, whereas, just to cite an example, France and the UK are facing the unemployment rates of 16% and 11% respectively. Generally speaking, youth unemployment is a most acute economic and social issue across the modern world. But as we can see, Russia is more or less successful in addressing this problem. We are following the right path and we are coping with it. Of course, there is room for improvement, but I would like to underscore that progress in that field is undeniable. And active youth employment yields results not just in the short term, because a good start, being a highly sought-after specialist in the labor market, this is something that sets the stage for later professional career of a young person and their place in society. It has an influence on their desire to make a family, take care of their parents, raise children, not just the firstborn, but fortunately a second or the third, and other children. And of course, this helps address social, economic, and demographic development of the country. Moving on, our employment is growing in the industries that create great added value and end products such as high tech, and I also refer manufacturing in IT, tourism, whereas employment in supporting industries such as public administration, trade and finance sees a decrease in employment there. And this is an objective fact and it's well grounded. Maybe not everyone knows that, but this is a very good trend that the employment there is decreasing. Just for your information, if we look at the dynamics in information and communication, we see an increase of almost 30% by 350,000 people. We see a 10.2% growth in manufacturing industry, whereas the number of workers in trade has decreased by 170,000 people, which is minus 3%. These are gradual yet very significant trends that reflect the structural and quality changes we intend to keep working through increasing the efficiency of our economy and introducing digital platform-based decisions and solutions to make sure that we decrease employment in the so-called supporting industries, but we have to provide those who are employed there with an alternative. And to that end, we will stimulate the creation of better, more attractive jobs with higher labor productivity that satisfy the new technological structure. And of course, for the benefit of our people, we have to fine-tune the labor legislation. The government has drafted a package of such amendments. I would like to ask the State Duma to adopt those amendments swiftly. I would like to reiterate that high-quality, structurally sound employment holds the key to improving income of citizens and families and decreasing inequality. Of course, inequality is still a problem, but we are making good headway in addressing that. We have already managed to do a lot to raise the income of the most vulnerable citizens. And on a particular note, I would like to say that we've managed to achieve a record decrease of poverty, because as of the end of last year, poverty level stood at 7.2%, and the positive dynamics is still very much in effect. And the first quarter of this year has seen a decrease of more than 2 million people, of those who earn less than the minimum wages. This august assembly knows that, but I would like to say that in 2000, the poverty level in Russia stood at 29%. This is for information of our guests. And unfortunately, 42.3 million people lived in these undignified conditions. In 2024, this level is just 7.2%, and it's just 10.5 million people. But this is not the end of our journey. We need to make sure that this figure goes down. We first have the task of decreasing it to 7% and then to 5%. But if we look at the economy in general, we see that the level of wages across Russia is still not sufficient. It's not adequate, and we need to be ambitious. We have to build an economy of high salaries, of high wages. It's of the utmost importance. This has to be based on higher labor productivity. Incidentally, the share of wages in the GDP increased from 40.7% to almost 44% in 2024. So in 3 years. What are we concentrating our efforts on? First and foremost, we are adapting education programs to the needs of the real sector. Incidentally, the youth unemployment dynamics I've just mentioned demonstrates that we are moving in the right direction. I would also like to add that this year, in the run-up to our forum, we have published a ranking of education institutions of Russia based on the quality of their jobs, employment, as well as wages. It shows us what professions are in greatest demand, what education institutions give their graduates the best education that the economy needs. This ranking shows the efficiency of management teams of these education institutions, and I would like to ask the heads of relevant ministries and colleagues, both at the federal and regional level, to pay close attention to that ranking, using it as an instrument for managing changes in professional education. Moving on, with a view to raising the income of our citizens, we need to raise their qualifications and retrain them to provide them with an opportunity to grow professionally, to move to other companies and even to other regions. In other words, we need to increase the mobility of labor force, which is of the utmost importance to the economy. It gives people a chance to occupy better, more promising positions with better conditions and terms and better wages. We also need to invest in new equipment, automate and integrate robots in manufacturing capacities, and they have to be serviced as well. And this will require professional, highly competent and highly paid employees. But raising income is important not just for individuals and families, but also for the economy in general, because a rise in income and a decrease in inequality entail a change in the demand structure, because this demand structure becomes more balanced. It stimulates the consumption of domestically produced services and goods. I refer to tourist industry, catering industry, these and also industries that capitalize on our natural reaches, improving the potential of our cities and settlements, making them more comfortable for life and for leisure and for work. And I would like to remind you that together with the government, we decided to introduce a new taxation system for the catering industry with a fixed VAT rate. Part of the revenue will be funneled into the municipal authorities, providing them with an additional resource for projects and development programs on the ground. First and foremost, to raise the standards of life. We're certainly going to support creative economy related to science, culture, art, and creativity, including such avenues as architecture, design, cinema, music, publishing, software, and so on and so forth. That's everything that the experts have dubbed the experience economy. This year, we have seen the entry into force of a federal law that has provided the legal framework for promoting creative industries. Until the end of the year, 70 regions are going to start introducing the standards for the development of this modern segment of economy as well as social life, creating the requisite infrastructure. To make sure this work is put on a systemic basis, I would like to ask the government, together with the Russian regions, to draft a long-term strategy for the development of creative economy and also think and consider launching a federal project.
On a separate note, I would like to speak about raising the tourist attraction of Russian towns and villages, a visible manifestation of our national identity. And true points of tourist attraction are ancient buildings, churches or estates, the cultural heritage sites. We have agreed that by 2030, we renovate no less than 1,000 such sites all across our country to give them a second life, including by means of opening museums, educational and exposition centers, hotels, and so on. The pilot program to restore cultural heritage sites with concessional funding for such projects has already covered 9 regions of Russia. The current goal is to extend it to other constituent entities of Russia. To make sure that allocated funds produce a better result, I suggest the following solutions. We could unite the resources of 2 concessional lending programs for creating tourist infrastructure and preserving the cultural heritage sites. Thus, the renovation and overhaul of ancient buildings for the business purposes in particular could be additionally funded from the loans that reduce trade. Apart from that, I suggest that we apply to these projects the so-called umbrella surety mechanism by the cooperation with the development of small and medium entrepreneurship. Let me add that at cultural heritage sites, there is a complicated investment and construction cycle. All those who are involved in it know it full well. It takes a long time, which we have to reduce where it is justified. We need to get rid of excessive formalism, definitely not to the detriment of preserving historical memorials. I ask colleagues from the Presidential Office to establish a designated interagency platform and come up with solutions on this topic and in general as regards restoration of cultural heritage sites. I have already mentioned the program to create a tourist infrastructure. We try to carefully and delicately involve our national parks into the tourist sphere. We put in place conditions to make sure they can be visited by tourists with due attention to the nature and protected ecosystems. It is another example of how Russia is implementing its environmental agenda. We don't waste the natural resources to seek short-term benefits, but we preserve and multiply them to the interest of the people and to the benefit of our society. In this context, I would like to mention this. Over the past decades, we have accumulated millions of tons of wastes from industry and mining companies. Of course, they are harmful to the nature and to the people, and they create problems. So I suggest that we think of launching special projects in order to recover valuable components of these wastes. We have designated technologies, we have to make use of them, thus business will be able to get profits and it'll help eliminate the accumulated environmental harm and at the same time encourage the development of natural science, domestic science and industry. Dear colleagues, exploration of new industrial, high-tech and service areas and spreading the range of economic activities are elements of structural transformation in the Russian economy. In this context, there is a second key area of our activities on which I would like to focus today. That is a new quality of investment climate. In a sense, I'm talking about a dramatically minimization of costs incurred by the business and entrepreneurs in all fields, starting from construction to ensuring facilities of new projects and to the ongoing operational activities, including all forms of accounting and notary services. We are working in close contact with regions, entrepreneurs and expert circles. Together we try to make sure that business and investment activities are growing all across the country in every town and village. Let me remind you that we have set ourselves a goal. The capital investments in Russia by 2030 has to grow by no less than 60% against 2020. The government has already launched a system for supporting investments in the regions. It includes provision of comprehensive and full services for the investor up to the stage when the plant is put into operation with access to all support mechanisms, including tax benefits and exemptions. We will carefully monitor how this is implemented and adjust it, taking into account the wishes of the business, its demands and needs. And of course, we will follow the example of the regions who are leading in terms of attracting capital investments and multiplying their successful experience and best practices. Traditionally, at this platform, I would like to announce the results of national ranking of the state of investment climate, which is prepared by the Agency for Strategic Initiatives. Now the ranking takes into account a greater number of indicators, 82 instead of 70. That is, it has become more detailed, which means it is more informative now. The capital of Russia, Moscow, leads the ranking just as before. It is followed by the Republic of Tatarstan and the Nizhny Novgorod region. They have demonstrated the greatest dynamic in this year. Both regions rank number 2 with similar results. Their current parameters of investment attractiveness are higher than Moscow had last year. What does it mean? It means that the standards are constantly growing. When we work in the investment climate, we should never stop. We should always look into the future and set new goals. In the third place of the ranking is Moscow region and the Republic of Bashkortostan. And in total over the past year, 57 regions have increased the integral index. In particular, I would like to note the regions of Chelyabinsk, Tver, Smolensk and Kaluga, as well as the regions of Voronezh, Saratov, Sakhalinsk, Novosibirsk and Lipetsk and the Altai region. They have demonstrated the highest dynamic. I congratulate colleagues in the regional teams on these results, and I wish all the regions further success in this important field. Let's welcome their success. Thank you. Thank you. As I've already mentioned, along with support for investments, we try to improve conditions for day-to-day business activities, and as we know, there are many tasks in this context, from registration of companies to dealing with insolvency. The government, together with the entrepreneurs and sectoral experts and experts from the Agency for Strategic Initiatives, have launched a large work. We are working on establishing a national model for target conditions for making business, taking into account international practices, but I'll emphasize, taking into account the national features and national development goals that we have set for ourselves. The model should be ready by September this year. We are talking about specific changes for the business which would be tangible and measurable. For example, by 2030, we have to almost halve the terms for being connected to power grids, or to decrease the time which is spent for filing and preparing tax documents by 1.5 times. The goal for the national model is to make sure that by 2030, Russia is among top 20 world leaders for business conditions, taking into account the updated international practices. It should serve as an example for our BRICS partners. Most importantly, the business climate has to allow us to enhance the basis of our economy to make it more sustainable and at the same time dynamic and aimed at producing goods and services and their promotion in the domestic market and for the global export markets. I'll note that compatibility of domestic goods, agriculture, services and many other fields should be based on our own technological solutions. It is the third area of structural transformation. The Russian economy should be more technological. And it's not just a wish. It's an objective requirement of the world of today and tomorrow. The challenge to which we have to be up to if we want to be stronger, and we do want to be stronger. We are to fully embrace a new stage of technological development of our country. The key instruments will be national projects for ensuring technological leadership. They were launched this year, and together with colleagues we have agreed that events within these national projects will be updated and added. By 2030, the aggregate spendings by the state and business for R&D in Russia should increase to reach no less than 2% of GDP. A special role is to be played by the private business. Its investment for these purposes should at least double. In this context, I would like to stress this. Supporting the technological transformation of Russian economy is the key task of almost 24 of funds and development institutions. But every one of them has its own methodology and approach. As a result, entrepreneurs have to come up with technical documents and other documents in different ways. On the other hand, it happens that funds and institutions may compete for same projects. Yes, competition is useful, but in this case, the interagency competition doesn't benefit the common cause, but on the contrary, it decreases the efficiency of financial organizational resources. Recently, we set up a designated working group under the Council for Strategic Development and National Projects. It's led by a head of Web RF, Igor Shuvalov, and I ask colleagues from the working group to analyze the activities of funds and development institutions on the technological track. The goal is to eliminate duplicating of functions, coordinate work of development institutions, and come up with unified requirements for business support procedures, from registration of an invention to serial production of high-tech goods. I'll stress, over the past 2 years, the number of invention registration applications from domestic companies and scientific organizations has grown by 13%. There is a growth in the field of optics and computer technologies, consumer goods and pharmaceuticals. However, it is important not only to develop solutions, but to implement them in a swift manner in goods and services for which there is demand within a country and on a global arena, which would be able to improve the quality of life of our citizens and make it more comfortable and convenient. We agreed that colleagues in the government will personally supervise implementation of new technologies in their fields of responsibilities. They will adjust the regulatory framework for experiments, testing, piloting, and upscaling the prospective solutions. It is important that the government comes with an annual report about dynamics of technological development to assess the current level of technological sovereignty of Russia and breakthrough solutions for technological leadership, as well as the tempo of their implementation in different branches of economy. Unfortunately, today the level of so-called commercialization of inventions in the university context is low. Small innovative entrepreneurs unfortunately are in a situation when only one invention in 100 reaches practical application. It is too few. We need more active cooperation between educational institutions, R&D institutions and business environment. We have to help them find each other. We have a program entitled A University of Entrepreneurs. It involves experienced businessmen who work together with students in designated workshops in the higher educational institutions. They come up with advanced technological solutions and products. We have already seen the first results. over 270 million of non-budgetary funds have been attracted, and this year the number of participating higher educational institutions will double. I ask the government to upscale this mechanism to make sure that there is a smooth cooperation at all stages, from formulating the idea for a project to making sure there is an independent business, and we need to ensure joint companies, universities and real sector companies. There is another important issue. We need to further development the market of intellectual property. We should expand the possibilities for loans secured by patents and trademarks. They should help business. They should help business have real assets which would attract investments. By the way, Russia has over 1 million of valid trademarks. Over the past year, our entrepreneurs have registered almost 77,000 brands, primarily in the fields of light industry, software, household chemicals, and some other fields. It is by 12% more than a year before. It is a good tempo and will support new Russian brands. In a month in Moscow, we'll see the results of a new competition entitled That's Us. Small and medium enterprises account for a great number of shares, and they require promotion as they enter new markets. Small businesses, separate entrepreneurs, or just a handy person from a small town or village today can find a customer for their products or services with the help of marketplaces. Previously, it was almost impossible. The audience, the number of their customers is growing not only in our country, but all across the world. Unlike most countries dependent on global platforms, Russia has good examples of own successful electronic platforms. It is a real and tangible achievement of domestic business of which we can be proud of. We will continue putting in place conditions under which Russian digital platforms will develop and compete with the international giants. We have already come up with a draft law which will be a first step to building a modern regulatory framework for platform economy. I ask the State Duma to accelerate the adoption of this draft law. I'll add, in the field of digital platforms, there are certain problems, in particular unfaithful practices of making business, violating the competition and the rules for using the data. I ask colleagues from the President's office, together with the government and business representatives, to discuss this topic within the intergovernmental interagency working group. I also ask you to analyze the regulation not for the digital but traditional offline trade, that is, shops, chain stores, and so on. Such regulation, in many regards, is outdated. It was developed in a different technological era and is not up to modern challenges and opportunities. I'll add that marketplaces have a large volume of data about the, so to say, health of the business and the state of the market. They know what support it needs, be it advertising or sales, recruitment of staff, or getting a loan. We should make use of these opportunities for the development of small and medium enterprises all across the country. I ask the government to come up with proposals in the context of coordination and aligning information and other instruments to support and promote the business that are at the disposal of the government and digital platforms, including financial and guarantee mechanisms of the SME cooperation. Next. The own independent solutions, including the digital solutions, should be used in order to strengthen the foreign trade infrastructure. I'm talking about logistics, insurance, and payment systems.
I'm happy to say that we have a state system of electronic consignment documents fully operational. So all the papers you may need for transportation by road, be that consignment documents or waybills, all of that can be done online, electronically. And on a monthly basis, more than 1.5 million of documents of the kind are being issued. We have intentions to go digital and use platform solution for all means of transport in Russia, including transport by road, air, rail transport, river and maritime connections. So we're talking about creation of the national digital transport and logistical platform. This modern technological foundation will serve for the development of international corridors, among others, including Trans-Arctic Transportation Corridor from St. Petersburg via Murmansk all the way to Vladivostok and many other transportation routes. As for payment infrastructure, here we are going to work closely with our colleagues from the BRICS bloc. We will be aiming to create efficient and reliable mechanisms and services that are fully independent from any kind of external interference. And in this regard, we absolutely need the experience that our countries have in circulation of digital national currencies. Russia has been implementing a pilot project of the kind for 2 years now. We worked on all the major operations, including opening of accounts, closing accounts, transfers between individuals and legal entities, payments for goods and services. Our goal right now is to make sure that the use of digital ruble is a commonplace, both between individuals and companies and banks. And I request the central bank and the government to accelerate this tradition and identify the periods for the technological development in the financial sector. In this regard, the fourth area of structural changes is in the new quality of foreign trade, and that applies both to export and import. The goal is clear. We need to increase the non-oil and gas export. And for that, we're determined to develop relations with our partners, eliminate trade barriers, untap new market niches, and shape infrastructure, develop it and strengthen investment cooperation. I'd like to remind you that we've agreed to develop long-term cooperation plans with our key partners. A good example of the kind is the plan for strategic cooperation with the People's Republic of China until 2030. Among others, we are going to develop action plans with countries like India, and those are to be finalized in the nearest future. We're also going to implement the national project dedicated to matters of international cooperation and export. We will support initiatives of our foreign partners that make use of Russian technological platforms, which means that the machine-building industry will be seeing additional demand. So in the nearest years, in the CIS countries, including Belarus, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, plus Turkey, Vietnam and a number of other countries, we will see a whole number of large-scale energy projects being implemented, including nuclear energy, extractive and processing industries, and the foundation for those projects will be Russian tech solutions that will also involve a number of Russian financial structures. Ramping up non-oil and gas export is just one of the tasks in the area of foreign trade. We are determined to transform the structure of imports step by step, specifically the products and items that we buy from our partners. By doing so, we would like to gradually increase the share of so-called labor-intensive goods and services that require major labor resources, human resources, physical and manual labor. In Russia, on the contrary, we need to focus on high-tech, complicated goods and services with a high degree of automation, high added value, which undoubtedly would contribute to better employment and more jobs in our country. Definitely with our partners from the Eurasian Economic Union, we are going to adjust tariff and customs policy in a way to create motivation for establishment of new manufacturing chains. We would like to encourage technological transfer to our country. We want to bring more tech solutions that should also create better quality of jobs and create more better paid jobs in the country. And I request the government to do the analysis together with the business community and come up with the proposals in the nearest future regarding potential and specific actions in this area. Dear colleagues, finance, infrastructure, the real sector of the Russian economy are developing along the principles of high technologies, flexibility, and ability to quickly respond to external challenges and any fluctuations to the demand that may happen on the side of our citizens or foreign partners. This approach is fully applicable not just to the civil sector, but obviously to the area of defense, and specifically the defense industry. Our meetings inevitably touch primarily on the matters of economic development and economic growth. Here at the forum, we talk about the current state of the economy. But in the world of today, we see that there is less and less of division between the defense industry and the other part of the economy. Some countries no longer have the difference. And those dramatic changes is the fifth area of the structural modernization of the economy and strengthening of our sovereignty. The key principles in this regard are the following. First and foremost, technological advancement on all stages, from development and manufacturing to logistics, procurement, and taking care of supplies to specific military units. We need to make sure that we constantly improve technological innovations in the civil sector, among others, but we also need to implement them very quickly in the area of defense and security. Whenever possible, we need to aim for synergies and adjacencies of the defense industry with the civil sector. We need to take care of the effective production of dual-use goods. Very frequently, there is no need to take care of adjacencies because many goods are dual-use by default, and they are very much in need in maritime and river facilities, aircraft engineering, electronics, manufacturing of medical equipment, agriculture, and more. I will tell you that we need to step away from clearly differentiating the companies between the military industry and those companies operating exclusively in the civil sector. The situation evolves in a way that we see that there are more and more competitors and competition from the high-tech holdings capable of addressing both military and civil objectives. The second point is all about the speed of change. Today, global business leaders, among others some of the Russian companies, may show that time needed from ideation to actual creation of a product can be reduced down to a quarter or even several months. And the time needed from the actual time of manufacturing of the product to the time it is delivered to the end consumer amounts to weeks or even days. The area of defense and security should be guided by those high standards. And finally, of course, flexibility. We are talking about increasingly important role to be played by commanders of military units, formations, and managers of the enterprises operating in the military industry. Primarily, it is all about taking care of the technical supplies, testing new hardware and machinery, and finally developing the final results and the tactics of achievement of this result. And I guess our colleagues from the area of defense industry and any adjacent industries would agree that it is crucial to develop the mechanism of very quick and effective scaling of best practices. We know how to do that, and we are doing it successfully. Fourth, economic efficiency is crucial to provide for the task we face in the area of defense. And a good example of the kind is introduction of video surveillance system using artificial intelligence. And it allowed us to dramatically reduce the number of offenses committed, for example, in the city of Moscow. That also applies to the fairly cheap and affordable UAVs. That is a very efficient way to destroy and eliminate very expensive military equipment. Obviously, we're going to learn from the negative experience as well. It is all valuable, building up to ability to make the right decisions. Generally, the defense industry has accumulated good pace, and the enterprises of the industry have been able to increase their produce manifold and are taking care of new weapons and arms production. We are determined to constantly modernize and update military facilities of the armed forces of Russia to make sure they are in line with the latest developments and state-of-the-art technologies that have proven their efficiency in combat conditions. At the same time, we're determined to develop military and technological cooperation with friendly countries. And here we're not just talking about supplies or modernization to supplies of machinery or hardware. It is also about joint developments, preparation of hardware, and creation of industrial capabilities on a turnkey basis. Dear colleagues, today I focused on 5 key areas of structural modernization needed by the Russian economy. And there are national projects already launched focused specifically on those goals. That also includes state programs. They require constant adjustment, taking into account the evolving situation in the world and new opportunities opening up to us. I request the Russian government to digitalize and make sure they monitor the KPIs related to the key structural changes in our economy. I also request you to monitor its dynamic and adjust if necessary. As mentioned earlier, the global economy is living through the largest scale transformation over the decade. The countries of the global majority are ramping up their potential by adjusting the power balance and changing the economic map of the planet. At the beginning of the 21st century, BRICS countries amounted to 1/5 of the global economy. Well, just 1/5. But today, the BRICS bloc account for 40% of the global economy. It is obvious that this share is set to grow. This is a medical fact. And this is going to happen inevitably. First and foremost, thanks to dynamically evolving countries of the global south. It is important that this growth is becoming increasingly sustainable, embracing more and more countries. And for that, we need a principally different development model, not the one based on the rules of neo-colonialism, when the so-called golden billion is sucking out resources from all other countries in the interest of a very narrow circle of the so-called elites. Not even in the interest of the people of those very countries. They are focusing specifically on the interest of their elites. If we are to look how this well-being was accumulated, for example, by the United States over the last decade, you would see that this is specifically the US elites and establishments acquiring all the profits and benefits. This is publicly available data, and if we are to look at the middle class, regular citizens, they would never benefit from those extra profits. Probably that is exactly one of the causes for the changes that we're witnessing today, among others, in the political arena. And we need to make sure that all of those changes are contributing to better quality of lives of people in our countries. It has to be translated into better quality of education, science, technologies, and infrastructure. And those are the priorities set by Russia, who is implementing its own agenda. Strategic areas that I have highlighted today require stable, long-term capital flows, among others, from international companies and investors. And in order to provide for that, we have to create an open and fair platform for global growth that will unite investment mechanisms and technological standards, financial and logistical services, trade instruments, and other solutions. I will reiterate, the goal per se is not to modernize the outdated mechanisms of the era of globalization. They are outdated. They have discredited themselves. We need to come up with a new model of development free of any kind of political manipulation, taking into account national interests of the countries. And obviously, this model should be focused on the needs of our citizens and their families. At the BRICS summit that took place this autumn last year in the city of Kazan, 35 countries came together, representing 2/3 of the population of planet Earth and half of the global economy. They all expressed shared understanding of approaches needed for the future world. Today, the BRICS countries set the bar by choosing and favoring the so-called human-centric industries. They are launching the largest projects to improve the quality of life. The BRICS countries are implementing large-scale initiatives in the area of nuclear energy and aviation, new materials and IT industry, robotics engineering, and artificial intelligence. Certainly, particular attention is being paid to strengthening connection within the BRICS bloc. The mutual goods turnover of our countries has already exceeded $1 trillion and continues to grow. All of that are elements of the global platform for growth. They are founded on the key principles of BRICS, that is primarily consensus, parity, accounting for the interests of one another. It is particularly important to highlight that we are open to anyone who would like to join us in this work, because the bigger is the circle of the countries involved in shaping and development of this platform, the more solid and efficient it will be, the more benefits it can generate for all who is aware of their responsibility to the future generations. Russia welcomes all of its partners to make their contribution to shaping new global growth model. Together, we can provide for prosperity of our countries and stable development of the whole world for many, many years to come. And this is exactly why this year in Moscow we conducted the Open Dialogue, where we had participants of more than 100 countries. We intend to make this format regular, and we'd like to build a whole ecosystem around it where we could discuss and elaborate on implementation of breakthrough ideas. The global challenges that the world of today is facing require global response. No country alone could resolve those countries, the more so at the expense of others. It is no longer possible. It is an illusion. It is only that through joint actions within the framework of BRICS or some other formats, we can ensure progress for the whole civilization. I thank you for your attention.
Mr. President, thank you so much for the speech that actually set the stage for a very interesting debate after the rest of the speeches. I give the floor to the President of the Republic of Indonesia, Prabowo Subianto. The floor is yours. Your speech.